getting into wedding photography, you're a little anxious, you've never done a wedding, you're worried things will go wrong, and you're not sure how to prepare. And that's okay. When it comes to weddings, nothing goes according to plan. And unfortunately, what could go wrong will go wrong. And let me give you a little background story on how my first few weddings went and some of the problems I ran into. My very first wedding, all right, this was a few years ago. I offered to do the shoot for free because I couldn't get another anyone to let me, shadow and second shoot for them. So I took a free gig. I don't know these people, but they were willing to let me shoot their elopement. So I show up after having, practiced for months and months and months with my cameras, and we get up to the ceremony, and the priest is essentially going through his speech, and I start taking the first few photos, and something goes wrong with my camera, and turning it on and off was not really helping with the technical issues, and I was starting to panic because the ceremony is ongoing, and I don't want to start to have to fickle and have to troubleshoot my camera. But having done a lot of research about how weddings, how they happen and how you can run into exactly this very problem, I had a backup camera that allowed me to continue to shoot and just go about my business. How bad luck do you have to have that one of your cameras that you've been using for months on end, never had this issue, just refuses to cooperate on the very first photo shoot, the very first 5 minutes of your photography career? So if I can leave you with one tip when it comes to preparing yourself, ensure that you have backups for backups. So bring multiple cameras, multiple lenses, multiple flashes. Have at least 2 or 3 of the same critical gear that you need. All right, because this is gonna happen to me. And I think the problem was with my camera is it was a really hot summer day, and I think the camera overheated before the shoot, and that's why I couldn't get more than 5-10 pictures in before it just stopped working. I managed to fix it after. Sorry about that, my phone cut off. Anyways, as I was saying, technical issues happens to the best of us, and the unfortunate luck that I had is I ran into one of the most fear problems that any new photographer can have is their camera stopped working. But I came prepared, and I had a second camera just in case that situation happened, and I had it on my body, which meant that I can quickly switch to my second camera, and ended up being my primary camera for the rest of the day, because I kind of lost faith in it a little bit, and I attributed that particular issue to the camera overheating. I believe I haven't shot in the hot sun like that, and I had been on site for some time before the shoot, so I guess it kind of overheated and it needed to cool down a little bit and be reset for it to work again, which it did. But I had lost faith in it, and had I not have a backup camera, I think I would have looked really unprofessional. Weddings are one and done. There is no retake, and so that's how you really can ruin your reputation when you come unprepared. So I learned on day one. So my next issue I ran into a few weddings down the road was I started to go more into hybrid coverage, because I knew that was where the industry was going when it came to wedding coverage, and so I had integrated video into my photography coverage, and I had brought some wireless audio lavalier microphones, and it's a pretty big name in the industry. It rhymes with R and O, and they were rated really highly amongst users, and I thought it will get the job done. And I had used it before that wedding, and I had no technical issues, but for some reason during the vows the audio started to suffer from static, which basically made it inaudible. You could not really hear what the groom or the bride or the officiant were saying because there was a loud hiss. And I think I figured it out why that problem was, and it's basically interference. And so depending on the structure you're in, especially old churches, they have oftentimes copper wiring running through the walls that can interfere with it. Could also be the audience and a lot of the technical, technology they bring to these events. So cell phones can create interference. There could be a number of things, but it really, really put a damper in my, in how it kind of put me down. I'll just leave it at that. And I kind of had to be honest with the groom that their vows were not so much ruined, because I did eventually fix the problem. And but I had to let the groom know that their ceremony audio was essentially damaged. And so the way I solved the issue is I actually hired a audio technician who fixed the audio, who was able to separate the interference from the regular vowels. But it wasn't, I would say, in terms of quality, it was 90% there, but he had to remove a little bit of the ambient sounds like the crowds, and so it worked for what we needed. But those are problems you don't necessarily want to have, because audio is a big deal when it comes to video. It's arguably 50% of the video is audio. It really helps retain the audience and adds a dimension that's very important. So having those kind of problems suck. So I've since switched to Tascam's DRL10, which are basically it records directly into the device, so there's no opportunity for it to get damaged per se. It's not sending the audio to a different device and then getting mixed up on the way there. So now it's directly, and then it requires an extra step of having to sync it in post. And the quality obviously has been improved, but that problem no longer, that's not a problem I'm gonna face, because I won't be using those devices anymore. So that's my second lesson that I learned, is really get to know your gear as best as you possibly can, because you only have one chance at this stuff. Now my third lesson that I learned, again, few weddings removed from that the audio issue, is weddings are unpredictable. And I've learned as you get into the industry, and you're especially taking on gigs that from clients that may not be putting in maximum effort or budget into the weddings, they kind of it's a la carte, a DIY wedding. A lot of things can go wrong, because now you have a person who's never been married before is now like trying to coordinate a wedding, and that kind of leaves you hanging, especially from a photographer standpoint. And this particular wedding that I went to did not use a timeline, even though I provided a copy. And so I was sort of anticipating the day. I did not know what was going on at all times, so I kind of had to guess what was happening. And the problem here was that they just started the ceremony without really giving me a heads up. So they just lined up and then just started walking up the church. There was no, hey Sam, we're getting ready, we're getting started, we're gonna bring the bride, we're gonna walk down the aisle. It was go time. And so because of that, and not knowing that was happening, I didn't have the proper lens on my camera. At the time I was shooting inside the prep room, so I was using a 23 millimeter prime lens, and then when the ceremony started, my objective was to switch to my 50 to 140. I guess in full frame you would call it the 70 to 200, because it's kind of a big church and there's a long walk up, and so I was using the wrong lens as the bride was and her party were walking down the aisle. The quality was still good, but I just didn't have the right lens, and I wasn't really satisfied with those pictures. Really, it was still good, but so the fact that you kind of you're gonna be put in difficult situations, and you really gotta try to be prepared at all times for anything that could happen. And so I learned a lot from these three particular issues. Is to always be prepared, always have backup plans, and always sort of plan for the worst case scenario, that things are not going to wait for you. Now you gotta stay on your feet at all times, and if you can do that routinely, I think you'll run a successful business, and you can run a profitable business. So I hope you learn a thing or two from this car podcast, I guess you can call it. And thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. See you later.